Vivid verses.
I heard her key in the lock at 23 minutes past 9, which was 4 minutes earlier than the previous Thursday and 11 minutes later than the Thursday before that. The variance interested me less than the average. Pottery classes, if they existed, would have a fixed end time. Thursdays with the property lawyer X, depending on what was being discussed and how thoroughly, would not. I had positioned myself in the armchair angled toward the door, with a book open in my lap and a glass of water on the side table. No wine. I wanted my hands steady and my mind clean for whatever this evening was going to be. The overhead light was on, which she would notice. We usually kept the lamps on in the evenings, but I wanted the room bright. I wanted to see her face when she came in, and I wanted her to see mine, and I wanted neither of us to have the soft cover of dim lighting to hide behind. She came through the door with the bag slung over her shoulder, the canvas tote she had been bringing to these supposed pottery evenings for 9 weeks now. The first thing I noted was that the bag hung lightly. It always hung lightly. A bag containing wet or even bisque-fired pottery would have weight and would sit differently against her hip. Tonight, it was practically empty, as it had been every Thursday since she'd started this routine. "Hi," she said, in the slightly bright voice she used when she was performing ease. "Hi," I said and closed my book. Watch the order of operations. She'll go to the kitchen first, drop the bag, get water, then come back through. She'll reach for casual conversation about her day to set the tone. The longer she's away from me in those first 30 seconds, the more she's preparing. She'd go to the kitchen first. I heard the bag set down on the counter, a soft thud, almost no clink. No clay vessel inside, even an unfired one, would land that quietly. I heard the tap run, the cupboard open, the cupboard close. She was taking her time. When she came back through, she had a glass of water in her hand and an expression arranged into something between tired and content. The expression of a woman who had spent 2 hours doing something mildly creative and slightly tiring with her hands. "How was it?" I asked. She sank into the corner of the sofa across from me, legs tucked up under her in the way she did when she wanted to look small and at home. "Good. Tiring. My wrists are killing me." "Yeah," I said. "What were you working on?" "Watch the eyes, not the mouth. The mouth has been rehearsed." "A bowl," she said. "Still on the bowl. The instructor says I'm trying to make the walls too thin too fast. They keep collapsing. That sounds frustrating." "It is." She took a sip of water. "But I think I'm getting better. I'm starting to feel the clay, you know? Like when it wants to give and when it doesn't." I let her have the line. I let her have all of them. I was interested, in a clinical way, in how much detail she would spontaneously generate. The amount of detail was always the tell. Truth is usually offered in fragments because the truth teller has no need to convince. Fabrication tends toward elaboration because the fabricator is filling silence to keep questions from forming in it. "How's your instructor?" I asked. "Still that woman? The one with the gray streak." There was no instructor with a gray streak. I had invented her 3 weeks ago, just to see. She had agreed there was, and built 3 subsequent stories around her. "Yeah, she was there tonight," she said. "She's good. A bit intense sometimes." I let the silence sit. Most people, in conversation, find silence intolerable for more than 3 or 4 seconds and will rush to fill it. She filled it now, which was one of her tells. When she had nothing to hide, she could sit in quiet with me for half an hour. When she was performing, the silence pressed against her. "There was this guy in the class tonight," she said, "who was making the most ridiculous mug. Like the handle was so big you couldn't fit your hand through it." I had to bite my tongue. A new character. Specific. Visual. Slightly comedic. The exact shape of detail that gets manufactured when one is reaching. She doesn't know I know. That's the only thing that matters in this conversation. As long as she doesn't know, She will continue to give me information about her own assumptions, and her assumptions are the most useful thing she possesses, because they tell me how she's calibrating her plan. Sounds like a good night, I said. It was nice. She smiled at me. The smile was the one she used when she was trying to close a topic and move us on to something more comfortable. How was your evening? Did you eat? I had something earlier. What did you make? I had not made anything. I had eaten a piece of toast at 7 and a banana at 8, and had spent the rest of the evening sitting in this chair, thinking about how I was going to do this. But I gave her a plausible answer about pasta, and I watched her receive it without curiosity, and I noted that she did not ask about the pasta or the sauce or anything else, because she did not actually want to know, and because the question had been a maneuver to get the conversation off the topic of her evening. I let perhaps another minute pass. I let her settle into the sofa and take another sip of her water and pull a cushion against her stomach. I let her believe, fully and with no shadow of doubt, that the evening's performance had landed. Then I said, in the same conversational register, "Could you show me something you've made?" She blinked. It was a small blink and quick, and if I had not been watching for the precise moment when her face would have to absorb a question it had not prepared for, I might have missed it. But I was watching and I did not miss it. What do you mean? Something from the class. A piece. Even one of the collapsed bowls. I'd like to see one. They're at the studio, she said. The answer came too fast. The answer had been preloaded weeks ago and was waiting in a drawer for exactly this question, which meant she had at some level anticipated it, which meant some part of her had always known this was a structurally weak lie. They have to dry, then they get fired, and they can't really be moved until then. I told you that. She had not told me that. I would have remembered, but I let it pass. Sure, I said. What about photos? You must take photos of your work. Most people do, even of their failures, just to track the progress. Watch the hands now. She'll do something with the glass. She'll use it as a prop. She took a long sip of water. The glass was empty when she lowered it. I don't really, she said. It feels weird to photograph my own bad pottery. Even one. Why are you asking? There it was. The pivot from defense to offense. When the lie cannot be sustained, the liar redirects the energy of the conversation back at the questioner, with the implication that the questioning itself is the violation. This, too, was a known move. I was not surprised by it. I had, in fact, been waiting for it, because the moment a person turns the question back on you is the moment you know they have nothing left in their hand. I'm just curious, I said. 9 weeks is a while. I like to see what you've been doing. I'll bring you something next week. Once it's fired, I nodded slowly. I'll let the nod sit in the air. I let her look at me, and I look back at her, and I'll let the silence build the thing that the silence was going to build, which was the suspended weight of her realizing that I was not going to accept the deflection and that she did not have a next deflection ready. She's working. I can see her working. She's running through her stored options and finding them either used or unsuitable. The pause is now 4 seconds, now 5. At 7 seconds, she'll either invent something new or break. At 6 seconds, she said, I don't understand what's happening right now. Nothing's happening, I said. I asked to see something you'd made. You're being weird. Am I? She set the empty glass down on the coffee table with a small, deliberate sound. She was beginning to understand, I think, that the conversation had moved into territory she did not control. Her instinct now would be either flight or escalation. The safer move from her position was escalation, because escalation could repaint the conversation as a fight she had not started, and a fight she had not started was a fight in which she was the wrong party, and being the wrong party would let her end the evening and reset the situation by the morning. What are you actually asking me? She said. I'm asking to see a piece of pottery. No, you're not. What am I asking then? She looked at me for a long second. I let her look. I don't know, she said, but it's not about pottery. This was, in its way, the closest thing to a true sentence she had said in about 9 weeks. I respected it, even. I had been waiting to see whether she would attempt to take the conversation by the throat, or whether she would let it continue to drift toward the cliff edge under its own gentle current. She had chosen the gentle current, and that was the choice that made everything that followed inevitable. "You're right," I said. "It isn't about pottery." She held herself very still. I could see her recalibrating. She had been preparing for some indeterminate period to be confronted, and now the confrontation was here, and I was reading on her face the rapid shuffling of which version of herself she was going to deploy. 3 options for her here. 1. The confession with reframing. She admits it, but explains it, casts it as something she was about to tell me, frames the lying as protective. 2. The indignant denial. She makes me say the thing out loud and then attacks the accusation directly, demanding evidence. 3. The partial admission. She gives me a piece, the smallest piece, and tries to negotiate the rest. Watch which one she picks. The choice will tell me how much she thinks I know. "I haven't been going to pottery," she said. So, the partial admission. She was assuming I had a sighting, perhaps from one of her friends, and she was going to give me the smaller piece in order to keep the larger piece intact. This was a calculation I could respect on a craft level, even as I noted the contempt buried inside it. The assumption that I was working with limited information and that a graceful partial truth would be enough. "Where have you been going?" "I've been seeing an old friend. From before us." "I should have told you." "An old friend?" "Yes." "Who?" She hesitated. She did not want to give me the name, because the name would tell her how much I knew. If I recognized the name, the conversation would move. If I didn't, she could insert a new layer of half-truth. "His name is Tom," she said. "We were together briefly, years ago. It's been completely platonic. I needed someone to talk to who knew me from before." The name was correct. The framing was not. Tom was a property lawyer who had specialized in the last 6 years in matrimonial and cohabitation property disputes. And 3 weeks ago, I had paid for a comprehensive professional background check on him, the way one pays for a survey before buying a house. Because if you're going to live somewhere or live near it, you want to know what's in the foundations. "Talk to about what?" I asked. "Just life. Things." I was struggling, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. "Things," I said. "Yes." I let another silence form. I had used the silence 3 times now. Each time it had cost her more than the time before. I was aware that I was being, in a clinical sense, cruel, but the cruelty was a small one, and the alternative was to let her continue to operate inside her own version of events while I let her, and I was not going to do that anymore. "What things specifically?" I said. "Because I've been here. We live together. If you were struggling, the obvious person to talk to would be me." "I know. So what was it that you couldn't talk to me about?" "Just, I don't know. Things about the future. About us." She's running out of pre-built sentences. She's improvising now. The improvisation is rough. Note the abstraction. Things. Life. Us. Real distress is concrete. Manufactured distress reaches for the blur. "Things about us," I said. "Yes." "Like what?" She drew a long breath. I think she was hoping that the breath itself would buy her time and would also signal to me that what she was about to say was difficult and emotionally costly, which would then activate, in me, the soft tissue that men reliably presented when their partners signaled difficulty. Like, whether we were going to last. Whether we wanted the same things. I've been having doubts, and I didn't know how to say them. Tom was just someone safe to think out loud with. I nodded again. The nod was, I think, the thing that was unsettling her now, because I was not raising my voice, and I was not pleading, and I was not, crucially, asking her to clarify the doubts so that we could examine them together. I was nodding the way one nods at a witness whose story one has already verified. "Did you talk to him about the flat?" I asked. She did not move. The non-movement was the answer. I gave her the seconds to recover, because I wanted to see what shape the recovery would take. What, she said. The flat. Did you talk to him about the flat? Why would I? What about the flat? That was a question, I said. Did you talk to him about the flat? I don't know what you mean. We talked about lots of things. Maybe it came up. He's a lawyer. I don't. What are you actually accusing me of? There. The pivot to accusing. Another known move. I did not engage with it, because to engage with it would be to consent to the framing in which I was the aggressor and she was being interrogated, and the framing did not match the facts, and I had no interest in pretending that it did. He's a property lawyer, I said, specifically in cohabitation disputes. He has a general practice. 64% of his caseload last year was cohabitation and matrimonial property. The rest was wills and probate. He doesn't have a general practice. There was a long silence here. It was the longest silence of the evening. How do you know that? She said. That's not the question that matters. It's a question I'm asking. And I'm telling you it's not the question that matters. The question that matters is whether you've been spending 9 Thursdays with a property lawyer who specializes in cohabitation disputes because you needed someone to talk to about your feelings, or whether you've been spending those Thursdays getting an unbilled education in how to make a claim against a flat you have not contributed to. Now watch. She has 3 responses again. Denial, deflection, admission. The first 2 require energy she's running out of. The third requires a reevaluation of who she's talking to, which is a reevaluation she has not yet made and may not be capable of making in the next 60 seconds. She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to me for a moment, and then she turned around. You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention. You hired someone. I asked questions. I paid a solicitor for a consultation. I paid a researcher for a background report on a man my partner was secretly meeting once a week. None of that is spying. All of that is what any reasonable person does when they notice that the person they live with is lying to them, and they want to understand the shape of the lie before they decide what to do about it. You should have asked me. I'm asking you now. She crossed her arms. The body language was contemptuous, which was good. It meant she had abandoned the wounded posture and was moving toward the offensive one. And the offensive posture was the one in which people gave the most away. What do you think you know? She said. I think I know what's true, I said. Would you like me to tell you what I think is true, and you can correct me where I'm wrong? She did not answer. I took the silence as a yes. You met him for coffee in early March by accident because he works near your office. That coffee turned into a longer conversation, and during that conversation you talked, in vague terms at first, about the fact that you and I had been together for a while and that you had moved into my flat and that you had not, in any formal sense, contributed to its purchase or to its mortgage. He asked you, professionally, whether there were any documents. You said you didn't think so. He told you, perhaps gently, perhaps just because he likes the sound of his own competence, that there are circumstances under which a long-term cohabitant can establish a beneficial interest in a property even without formal contribution. You found this interesting. You came back the next week. And the next. The conversations became more specific. He started to walk you through the kinds of evidence that would be useful. Paid bills, a contribution to renovation, anything that suggested a constructive trust, anything that suggested I had induced you to believe the flat was partly yours. He may even have started keeping notes. How am I doing? She said nothing. Her face had gone very still. I guess, I said, that the conversations have been moving in the last 2 or 3 weeks toward whether you should start documenting things, whether you should pay for a small renovation out of your own account, whether you should get me to put something in writing, a casual email, a text, a card, that could later be characterized as a representation. Whether, in short, you should start constructing a paper trail for a future claim. I watched her. She watched me. How did you get the percentages? She said. It was almost an admirable response in that it did not deny anything. It went straight to the question of my methodology because her mind was now, finally, doing what it should have been doing 9 weeks ago, assessing me as an opponent rather than as an audience. That's not the question that matters either, I said. Then what is? The question that matters is what you thought was going to happen at the end of this. Did you think you were going to file something? Did you think you were going to come to me with a number and ask for settlement? Did you think you were going to leave first and let him write the letter? Or were you just gathering information in case? She didn't answer. It's the last one, I said. Isn't it? You weren't going to act yet. You were building a position so that if and when you needed to act, you'd be ready. You were giving yourself optionality. You make it sound. I'm describing it, not characterizing it. You were doing what people do when they are in a relationship they're not sure about, and they want to make sure that whatever happens, they will not walk out of it with nothing. It's not even an unreasonable thing to want. It's just an unreasonable thing to do without telling the person you live with. She uncrossed her arms. She put her hands at her sides. I think she was, in this moment, approaching something honest, and I was curious to see how close she would get. I didn't know how to bring it up, she said. Bring up what specifically? That I didn't know if I was. Whether you wanted to be in this anymore. Yes. And so instead of bringing it up, you spent 9 weeks meeting with a lawyer to find out what you could extract from it if you decided to leave. That isn't fair. It is fair. It's just unflattering. There's a difference. She sat down in the armchair across from me, which was a different seat than the one she had been in before. I noted the change. People who choose new seats during a difficult conversation are usually trying to reset the spatial dynamic of the room because they sense that the existing dynamic is not serving them. What are you going to do? She said. I've already done it. She looked up. What does that mean? Now was the moment. Now she finds out that the territory she thought she was surveying has already been redrawn. The surprise is the point. Not because I want her to suffer, but because as long as she believes she still has leverage, she will keep trying to use it, and we will be sitting here at midnight, and at 2 in the morning, and tomorrow morning having different versions of the same conversation. I'd rather she know now what is true, so that what we discuss tonight can be the actual shape of the thing. 3 weeks ago, I said, I had a long conversation with my own solicitor. We went through every aspect of the flat. Ownership history, finance, the entire span of our cohabitation. We drafted a declaration of trust, which I signed. We reviewed every communication between us that could in any way be characterized as a representation. There aren't any. I went back through emails, texts, and the cards I've given you in the last however many years. I've been careful without realizing I was being careful for the entire time. There is no paper that suggests, even loosely, that I induced you to believe the flat was partly yours, because I never did, because I never thought of it as ours. Anything you may have been asked to assemble, receipts, contributions, a renovation invoice, there is nothing of that to assemble because you have not made any. The flat is mine. It was mine before we met. It is mine now. And the legal architecture around it has been quietly tightened to a point where any claim you might bring would not survive a first letter of response. I watch her process this. The processing was visible. She was running every memory she had of the last few years, looking for the thing she could point to. I knew, because I had done this exercise myself 2 weekends ago, that she would not find it. There was no contribution. There had been gestures, flowers, a coffee table she had bought, but taken with her each time she talked, in passing, about leaving for a girls' weekend, a half-paid gas bill in the second month after she moved in. Nothing in the volume or pattern that would establish anything. You did all of that, she said, slowly, without telling me. You did 9 weeks with him without telling me. That is not the same. It is exactly the same. It is precisely the same shape of action, preparing one's legal position in private during a relationship one is not sure about, except that I did it in response to your having done it first, and I did it on the side of defense rather than offense, and I did it once you had made the first move. If you want to argue that what I did was wrong, you have to also argue that what you did was wrong, and you have not been willing to do that for 9 weeks. She put her hand over her mouth. It was the first physical gesture she had made all evening that I could not parse for performance. It might have been one. I cannot tell. I noted that I could not tell, and I let myself sit with not knowing, because not knowing was an honest place to be, and I had decided some time ago that I was going to spend the rest of this conversation and possibly the rest of my life in honest places. I think we're done, I said. She looked at me through her fingers. I'm not asking, I said. I'm telling you. I think we're done. Just like that. Not just like that. After 2 months of watching this carefully and 3 weeks of putting things in order, and 1 evening of giving you the chance to say something different than what you said. I have been considering this for a long time. Tonight is the confirmation, not the decision. You decided before you talked to me. I decided when I understood what you were doing. The talking was for me, to make sure I understood it correctly. I did. I do. She lowered her hand. There were no tears. I respected this. I had expected tears and would not have held them against her. But their absence was, in its own way, a form of honesty. She was not going to pretend that what was happening was something other than what it was. What happens now, she said. You stay here tonight. There's no need to do anything dramatic. Tomorrow, on Saturday, you can begin to move your things. I'll be out for most of the day. You can take what's yours. If you want to ask my solicitor for a list of items I consider to be jointly purchased and therefore subject to discussion, I'll send the list by email tomorrow morning. There are about 6 items. None of them are worth fighting over. If you want any of them, take them. If you want to have the discussion, we can have it. I'd rather you take them. I sound like someone who has thought about this. I'm not enjoying it. I'm not punishing you. I'm describing what I think the cleanest version of this is. She nodded. She kept nodding. The nodding went on for slightly too long, and then she stopped. Were you ever going to tell me, she said, that you knew? I'm telling you now. Before tonight, I mean. If I'd said something different. If I just admitted it. Would there have been a way back? I considered this. It was, I thought, a real question, possibly the realest question she had asked all evening, and it deserved a real answer. No, I said. I don't think so. I considered that. I sat with it. The thing you did is not the kind of thing I can come back from. It isn't the meetings. It's the calculation. The fact that, faced with a feeling that you might want to leave, your first move was to start engineering the financial exit before you had the conversation with me. That is not a thing 2 people can talk through. That is information about who you are, and the information is now in my possession, and I cannot unknow it. I'm not angry with you for it. I just know it. And knowing it, I cannot live with you. That isn't fair either. It might not be. It's still the case. She looked around the living room. She looked at the bookshelves and the lamp on the side table and the rug, which had been mine before her, and which would be mine after her. I think she was beginning, finally, to see the room as she was now going to have to see it, as a place she was leaving, as a place that had never quite been hers to leave, as a place from which her presence would, with very little disturbance to the furniture, be removed. I like to go to sleep, she said. Okay. In the spare room. Okay. She stood. She paused. She seemed to want to say something else. I waited because if there was something else she needed to say, I would let her say it, but I was not going to prompt her, and I was not going to fill the silence on her behalf. You're so calm, she said. The words came out almost wondering, as if she had only just registered the fact and was now trying to work out what it meant. Yes. It's frightening, actually. I know. Were you ever going to, at any point, Were you ever going to react to this the way a normal person would react? This is how I react, I said. This is what reacting looks like for me. She stood there for another moment. Then she walked out of the living room. I heard her go into the spare room. I heard the door close. I heard, after a while, the sound of her crying, which was muffled, which I think she intended to be muffled, and which I sat in my chair and listened to without moving for about 15 minutes. I could have gone in. I considered going in. I sat with the consideration. I asked myself whether going in would change anything that was true about the situation, or whether it would only soften the surface of it for both of us, in a way that would make tomorrow morning harder rather than easier. I concluded that the second was more likely than the first. I picked up my book again. The thing I have learned about decisions, I thought, is that the decision is not the hard part. The hard part is the months you spend before the decision, watching the evidence accumulate and try not to act on it before you have enough. Once you have enough, the decision is a single sentence. The single sentence has already been written by everything that came before it. All you have to do is speak it. I spoke mine. I read for another hour until I was sure she had fallen asleep. Then I went into the kitchen. The canvas bag was still on the counter where she had left it. I did not open it. I did not need to. I had seen the way it hung, and that was sufficient. I put on the chair by the door where she would find it in the morning. I locked the front door, turned off the lights, and went to bed in our room, which was as of tonight my room and would be from now on. I did not have trouble sleeping. I had not expected to. The conversation I had been preparing for 2 months had taken approximately 45 minutes and had gone in almost exactly the shape I had thought it would. There were small surprises. She had given up the partial admission earlier than I had expected, and she had asked a better last question than I had given her credit for being capable of, but the overall trajectory had landed where I had calculated it would land, and the calculations had been made carefully, and the carefulness had been the point. I lay in the dark for a few minutes before I slept. I thought about what tomorrow would look like. I thought about Sunday and the week after, and the empty side of the bed, and the half of the closet that would need rearranging, and the small adjustments to the rhythms of a household that had, in fact, never quite been a shared household, only a household in which two people had sometimes overlapped. I thought about her in the spare room, and whether she would wake before I did, and whether she would leave a note. I thought she probably would not. She would leave silently, the way she had been leaving silently every Thursday for 9 weeks, and the silence of her leaving would be, for the first time, the actual content of what she was doing rather than its disguise. That was fine. I had built the rest of my life to be hospitable to silence. I had not always known I was building it that way. Tonight I knew. I closed my eyes. I slept.
Thanks for listening.